Hey guys, Will here. So today we have in front of us the Pimax 5K Super VR headset. About 6 months ago, we took a look at the 8KX headset. And while we were overall pretty impressed with that, we were a little concerned about the ability to take full advantage of the resolution that offered at 4K per eye, or 3840 by 2160 pixels per eye with today's PC technology. Even with our 3090 based system, we were ultimately having to settle for either a lower frame rate or lower resolution, some sort of a compromise between the two, ultimately not taking advantage of what the headset was able to offer. So enter the 5K Super headset. Now this offers pretty much all the same features and benefits that we see with the 8KX, but at a lower resolution of 2560 by 1440 per eye. So what I'm hoping with the 5K Super coming in at around half the price of the 8KX is that we're going to be getting much better value and performance for our money, and that is exactly what we're going to be testing today. So stick around. Okay, so before we kick off here, just a couple of quick housekeeping things. As always, thank you very much to Pimax for sending across the 5K Super and the 8KX, which you looked at previously for us to check out. They did also send us a couple of lighthouses as well as some of their sword controls, which we'll be checking out briefly today as well. Now, as part of the process today, we will also be making some comparisons with some other headsets which we've tested here at Boosted Media. Those were all provided by their respective manufacturers as well. And if you do decide you want to pick up any of the headsets that we discussed today, we have some affiliate links down in the description below. That is an awesome way of helping support the channel at no additional cost to you guys. And we really greatly appreciate your support. That's what keeps us running. So thank you very much for that. But yeah, if you want to check out the reviews of any of the other headsets or any of the other gear that you see in today's video, head on over to boostedmedia.net or follow the link down in the description and you will find that content. Now, I want to keep the majority of today's video around the actual experience of using the headset, but we do need to cover off some important specs and information so you know exactly what you're looking at here. The main call out features when it comes to the 5K Super are the 2560 by 1440 resolution of the panels per eye. We also have an experimental refresh rate here of 180 Hertz, which is double that of the 8KX, which we tested before at 90 Hertz. So it's going to be really interesting to see what kind of impact that has on the usage experience. And of course, whether we're actually able to get anywhere near that in terms of our frame rate to actually utilize that refresh rate in the first place. So that's definitely something we'll be testing. Now, in terms of field of view here, we have a horizontal field of view of 170 degrees or diagonal of 200 degrees. So exactly the same as we had with the 8KX. And that was one of the things that surprised me, just how much difference that makes, particularly with sim racing, the sense of speed that you get with that extra field of view, even though it may not necessarily be particularly clear. Now, in terms of the panels themselves, resolution aside, again, we have the exact same panel type as we had with the 8KX, customized low persistence liquid panels, or CLPL panels if you want to use the acronym, of course, not to be confused with OLED panels. Now, the difference there, of course, is very important. OLED panels emit their own light per pixel. That means that you can have 100% brightness on one pixel with a completely black pixel right next to it. That gives you a really great contrast ratio or difference between light areas of the screen and dark areas of the screen with no kind of bleed across. Now, with a LCD panel, you're relying on a backlight actually shining through the panel. And that, of course, means that you are going to get at least some degree of bleed between light areas and dark areas of the screen. So again, that's something that we will be paying attention to today. Now, in terms of specifications for the PC required to drive this, I think this is an important thing to cover as well. So I'm going to pull my cheat sheets in here. So Pimax say it requires an Intel i5 9400 or better with 8 gigabytes or more of memory. Now, in terms of a graphics card, they're saying a GTX 1060 with 6 gigabytes of VRAM or equivalent with a recommended graphics card of a GTX 1080 Ti. Now, if we compare that to the 8KX, the minimum requirement there was an i5 9400 processor. So the same there, 16 gig of RAM as opposed to the 8 gig of RAM. And in terms of graphics card there, they recommend at least an RTX 2060 and recommend an RTX 2080 or above. They say it's not compatible with AMD or NVIDIA lower graphics cards and laptops. Please use a desktop PC. So just a couple more quick things to cover off here. IPD or interpupillary distance is mechanically adjusted. There's a little switch just down the bottom here, or a little dial I should say, that allows you to wind in or wind out the IPD. Now they quote, and let me make sure I get this right, an IPD range of 60 millimeters to 72 millimeters. Now I have seen quite a number of users when I was doing my research complain that if you are below about 64 IPD, then you do start to get some blurry vision there. So more specifically, we saw a pattern emerging of people that had an IPD of less than 64 millimeters complaining of blurry vision. Now my IPD is 64.5, so that's not something that I can personally test. Tom's is actually a little bit wider than mine is. So unfortunately, we can't test that for you guys today, but just be aware of that. Do your research there. There does seem to be quite a number of people complaining that have IPDs less than 64 millimeters. So be aware of that. So just a couple more quick things to cover in terms of inputs and outputs, starting off with how you actually plug it into your PC, which is important. You've got a 4.5 meter long cable, and this is relatively flexible. It seems to be like a nice sort of kind of silicon material. It's got a decent bend radius there as well, so you can see it's not kinking and damaging the cable, even if I bend it down to about probably 2 centimeters. Wouldn't want to go any further than that. So yeah, you shouldn't have too many issues with feeling, you know, uncomfortably tethered or anything like that. You've got 3 physical connections on the cable, so you can see it goes from 1 to 3. You've got 2 USB-A connections. One of those is a USB 2, one of those is a USB 3 connection, and then you've got a full-size DisplayPort connection there too. Now, in terms of audio, a couple of options available here. So by default, inside what they call the modular audio strap, which is the headband which goes around the back, you've got these little speakers built in there. So they kind of sit right over your ears without actually making contact with them. And they're quite efficient at actually creating the environment around you without, you know, feeling like you're wearing headphones. So they do work quite well for what they are. They are upgradable as well to a couple of different options which you looked at with the 8KX module, the KDMAS system and the DMAS audio system. So those are 3 options. Look, the audio quality isn't absolutely fantastic. It's not what I would refer to as high fidelity audio where you'd be wanting to listen to music or anything like that. And there is quite a bit of audio spill from this as well if you crank it up. So if you've got other people in the room trying to study or sleep when you're trying to play VR games, probably not the best option here. But thankfully, there are a couple of little audio jacks integrated as well, just 3.5 mil stereo jack. So you can see here, we've got one plugged in for this side and on this side as well. If you upgrade to the KDMAS or DMAS system, there's actually a little Y cable which plugs in here, which splits it out for either side. So you can plug your own headphones with a 3.5 mil stereo jack into those ports. And look, in my experience, that works better. That's the option that I would prefer. I'm not sure what the impedance is on that output though, so it may not be compatible with all headphones, but yeah, absolutely fine for all the ones that I tried it out with. And then if we flip the unit over, we can see a little tiny pinhole just there, which I believe is the microphone. Now again, the audio quality of the microphone isn't absolutely fantastic. It's enough to get by, but certainly nothing to rave about. So I think that covers everything we need to in terms of the physical hardware. Let's get in now, get set up on the PC, have a quick look at the software, and then get in and do some gaming. Okay, so we have the headset up and running on our PC. Now it did take quite a bit of effort to get this running. Took about probably 6 or 7 hours of stuffing around to actually get this functioning. I guess reliably is the best word for it. So what we found is that sometimes when we would plug it in, it would fire up and it would all work just fine. Other times we'd have a solid red light on the headset and we weren't sure whether it was a power issue or some sort of a firmware issue, software issue or what it was. We got in touch with support. Happy to say support were very quick in responding and we were going through the normal customer support process. We weren't going through a marketing team or anything like that. So I'm sort of confident that my experience would be, you know, the same as what you guys would have with regards to trying to get customer support from Pimax. So yeah, basically what happened is they sent me a bunch of instructions. They sent me some experimental firmware to flash to the headset too. So the long story short is that after quite a bit of messing around, we were able to get it running reliably on the system. I'm not 100% sure what the cause of it was, but it doesn't seem to be any sort of hardware issue. It does seem to be a software-based issue. So now that we are up and running successfully, let's just quickly run through the PiTool software, which is, I guess, the control hub for the headset where you connect to your peripherals and calibrate everything and so forth. So we'll just quickly run through this. We've got a status window here, which gives us the ability to launch SteamVR. Obviously the headset will be integrated with most of our games via SteamVR or OpenVR. We can pair various different devices. We can restart the service. We can reboot the display. We can also go through the room setup process as well. That's a pretty straightforward process. It's just about calibrating the headset to the area that you're going to be using it in. So no real need to go through that. And you can see down the bottom here all the various different peripherals that we've got detected. So we're running one base station at the moment, as well as two sword controllers, which you'll see just down there. So if we go across to settings, we've got a general tab here where we can check the version of our software and our firmware. We can choose a language and we can choose to start the software up at launch and various things like that. We can also change which tab it goes to by default when we boot up the headset as well. So moving on to the HMD tab now, we've got the option here for choosing between outside-in tracking with the lighthouses, as we mentioned earlier, and also 9-axis tracking, which actually uses accelerometers inside the headset itself rather than cameras, because you can see this obviously doesn't have any cameras, to figure out what its position is relative to the environment around you. Now, in our experience, using the 9-axis tracking for sim racing specifically doesn't work too well. You tend to get quite a bit of drift going on, and it tends to sort of only move in one axis rather than giving you a three-dimensional environment to move around in. So I would definitely recommend not using that 9-axis mode. I mean, you may find that it works for you. Again, it's going to depend on the environment that you're in, but for us, wasn't really any good. We did have to use lighthouse tracking to get a good experience. We can turn on or off the light bar across the front here. And then we get down into the more heavy stuff. So we can choose between 90 Hertz, 120 Hertz, 144, 160, and 180 Hertz. Definitely we'll be checking that out when we get up and driving in a minute. We can choose our backlight brightness here as well. So that's going to influence the brightness of the display. We've got a software-based control for interpupillary distance offset here too. Didn't actually find that I ended up needing to use that, but again, depending on your anatomy, you may need to. And then we've also got an adjustment here for screen vertical offset value, and we can also enable motion compensation here too. Haven't found that we've needed that for sim racing, but again, your experience may vary. So moving down to the game settings now, we have a adjustment for common settings. So this applies all the settings below to every single game. You can also set up individual profiles for the games that it detects that are installed. So that is all very handy. So under Brain Warp, we have a field of view adjustment between large, normal, small, and potato cam. I found that large actually started to cause some issues with flickering on the screen. Obviously your experience may vary from there. So I ended up leaving it on normal. I didn't notice a massive difference between them anyway, but obviously because it wasn't working properly, I'm not 100% certain what impact that has. But I found that the field of view was plenty big enough for me, even with the normal setting there. So, and it seemed to be taking up pretty much the entire LCD panels. Anyway, so then render quality, the little tooltip here says, please adjust it properly. The high value will lead to be stuck on display. So a little bit weird there, but I'm pretty sure what this setting is doing is adjusting the super sampling. So it's allowing us to render resolutions higher than our native panel resolution or lower than our native panel resolution. Most games these days have their own sort of super sampling built into them anyway. And we do have the fixed foveated rendering setting below that, which I would generally recommend using instead of this anyway for most people, but again, it's going to depend on your particular specs. So what foveated rendering is it allows the area that you're focusing on to be rendered in high resolution, and then it lowers the resolution depending on how far out you are from the sweet spot in your visual field of reference. So if you're looking at the middle of the screen, obviously all your attention's focused there, and that's where you want to have all the detail. Your peripheral vision, although you may not notice it just by looking around in general, it doesn't actually require the same kind of resolution. So what you can do is you can reduce the resolution there, which increases performance, and you don't notice such a big visual impact, if any visual impact at all, compared to if you were to just scale down the entire screen. So it's a really clever way of increasing performance with minimal visual impact. Now, notice that it says fixed there. If you remember our Varjo Aero headset review recently, that actually has built-in eyeball tracking. So what it was able to do was move that sweet spot around on the screen relative to the position of your eyes. Now, because we don't have inbuilt eye tracking on these headsets, although it is an aftermarket accessory, I believe, we have the fixed foveated rendering, which basically just means it's always the center of the panel. So what that means is that if you are looking around on the screen with your eyeballs rather than turning your head, you are going to notice that difference in visual clarity. Now, obviously there is a sweet spot within the visual field optically as well, so that will have an impact also, but yeah, not quite as good as it is on the Varjo Aero, but again, remembering that we're looking at a headset that's half the price here, it does actually work really well. So for me, I ended up putting this on the balance setting. That gave me about a 10-15 frame per second boost in Assetto Corsa Competizione without really having any noticeable visual impact, at least for my eyes. So a good setting to have there. We have compatibility for parallel projections. What does it say about that? It says, if the picture of the game which is in the helmet is not superimposed, please tick this item, but this may have an impact on the performance of the game. We ended up leaving that off. And then we've got a couple of other settings here for smart smoothing, which we did actually end up turning on, hidden area masking, and then compatible with Vive only game. Now, if we continue to scroll down, we've got some adjustments here for our individual color channels on the headset too. So you can boost your contrast and your brightness for the left and right panels individually. And you can choose whether you want to have that impact all color channels or the red channel, green channel, or blue channel individually. And then under the games tab, just a basic launcher here for launching the various different games that it detects. And it's nice that it doesn't show you a bunch of games that you don't have installed. It's only detecting and showing the games that we do have installed on this machine. And then we've got a help tab here as well for getting a log file, and then obviously submitting that across to the support team should you need to do so. And also some quick links here as well to forums, email support, and so forth. So overall, pretty clean and well presented software. Not super complex, but all the things that you need appear to be there. And obviously a lot of the adjustments that you're gonna be making are gonna be done through Steam VR anyway. So yeah, that is the software package. Do wish that the process for updating firmware was a little bit cleaner than what it was, but we ended up getting it up and running in the end. But the main focus for the rest of the video now is gonna be that balance of performance between visual quality, refresh rate, frame rate, obviously, and that field of view as well. So let's jump in now and let's check it out. Okay, so we've spent a good number of days now testing this headset across a range of different sim titles, as well as a couple of other things as well. We did some flight simming and a couple of other sitting down type games as well, just to sort of get a good sense of exactly where the sweet spot sits for this headset. Now, because it's impossible for you guys to actually see on the screen what I'm seeing through my eyes when I'm wearing this headset, what I'm gonna do is run through my pros and cons from the experience using this guy and run some footage on the screen while we're doing so you guys can see some of the various different titles that we tested. First thing and most important thing is that it gave me a good level of visual clarity without too much screen door effect. Now, obviously there is a lot more screen door effect than what we get with something like the 8KX, for example, with double the resolution effectively, but it's not so much that it kind of really pulls you out of the experience. So if you're paying attention to it, you will see it. And you know, it is a constant reminder that you are wearing a headset and that it isn't real life. One of the things that I absolutely love about the Varjo Aero and the 8KX, even though the Varjo Aero doesn't have necessarily a massive resolution, because of the optical quality that you have with those lenses, it's a really, really sharp image. And you do forget at times that you're actually wearing a headset. Really does pull you in to the 3D environment that you're in inside the game. Whereas with this, I was always aware that I was inside a game, although when you're really in the heat of the moment, you do get lost in the experience. So it's obviously gonna vary from person to person there. I'm really sensitive when it comes to that kind of stuff. I'm always the sort of person that wants to have the graphics cranked up and wants to have the best visual experience possible, and I'm usually willing to sacrifice other things to get that kind of experience. So that's the kind of person I am, and obviously it's gonna vary from person to person. But I felt that it gave a good experience overall, a good balance of performance between visual quality, field of view, of course, and then of course the kinds of frame rates that we were able to achieve with the headset. And of course that will vary depending on the system you have. We're running a 12900K with a 3080 Ti, and I was able to get a pretty consistent 80 to 90 frames per second. And that was with the settings cranked up to either high or epic on pretty much everything. So obviously you can crank that down further to get more frames on systems that have a lower capacity. So next on the list, same awesome 170-degree vertical field of view, or 200 diagonal, that we had with the 8KX, which is genuinely a game changer. Now again, different people will prioritize different things in their experience. I find that that wider field of view really does give you a greater sense of speed, particularly in sim racing and flight sims. Things like Beat Saber, for example, obviously field of view is going to be a lot less important, so it's going to come down to the types of games that you're playing. But for sim racing and flight sims, again, I feel like this hits a really, really good sweet spot there in terms of the field of view. So next on our list, relatively large optical sweet spot, and that's something that did actually surprise me with this headset, with good clarity across the majority of the field of view and minimal chromatic aberration or splitting of the color wavelengths. Now, when we reviewed the Varjo Aero, one of the things that I didn't like about that headset was that there was quite a lot of chromatic aberration. So even though the image was quite clear, you got quite a lot of splitting of the light, which created almost like this rainbow effect on the edges. So when you're looking in the sweet spot, it was fine, but when you look off to the sides, you get this kind of distorted color banding going on. Very, very minimal effect on this particular headset. Very good sweet spot, lots of visual clarity within that sweet spot, and you're able to actually look around with your eyes quite a lot more than you are with many other headsets that I've tested in the past, particularly when compared to the HP Reverb G1 and G2 headsets. I really found that I wasn't having to move my head around as much with this headset, and I was able to look around just with my eyes, which is something that will genuinely change the experience for you. So that was definitely a positive and something that stood out for me there. The fixed foveated rendering increases the performance without a major impact on visual clarity. We talked about that a little bit earlier on, so you can skip back to that part of the video if you want more detail on that. But those kinds of features that allow you to boost performance without taking a massive visual hit obviously improve the experience overall very significantly, particularly for people that have more entry-level PCs. So great contrast ratio with nice deep blacks and minimal backlight bleed. Again, that was something that impressed me. I wasn't sure with being LCD panels how much backlight bleed there might be and what the contrast might be like, but it did have really nice deep blacks. Even in areas where we had white right next to black, there was minimal backlight bleed, and yeah, just overall a very nice visual experience. Another note that I made here as well was really nice vibrant color reproduction, although I am colorblind, so you might want to seek some other opinions on that one, but to me at least it did look very bright and vibrant, and the colors really did pop out quite nicely for me. So high refresh rate gives a very smooth experience, provided that you can push enough frames to take advantage of it. Now, again, with the 3080 Ti that we're running here with a 12900K processor, I wasn't able to get more than sort of 80 to 90 frames per second whilst maintaining those higher graphics settings. Obviously, if you crank those settings down, you can push higher frame rates. So having those higher refresh rates will allow you to take advantage of that. One thing that you will notice with VR in particular compared to monitors, particularly if you're running a monitor with adaptive sync or G-Sync, is that any sort of variation in the frame rate does tend to create some weird effects on the displays, and it'll start to lead towards getting headaches. So what I would generally recommend, if you can, is try to lock your frames per second a couple of frames below or the same as the refresh rate on your panel. And provided that your PC's got the grunt to be able to do that, that's going to give you the smoothest overall experience. But on the subject of refresh rate, there were a couple of things with regards to that in our cons list, so stay tuned for that in just a moment. Next up, provision for connecting your own earbuds. So it has a couple of 3.5mm stereo jacks, one on either side, so you can plug in your own headphones if you wish to do so. And that is something that I would recommend doing, because I wasn't particularly impressed with the sound quality, either on the default headphones that are built into it, as well as the upgraded ones as well. I really don't think that they're worth the money. I think you're far better off just using your own ones, but the fact that there is provision for doing so is obviously a good thing. Comfortable once fitted, although it does become quite heavy during longer sessions, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on too. So moving away from the hardware and visual experience, more into the overall experience of owning and using one of these headsets, one of the things that you'll really appreciate is that there is a really strong and active online community around these Pimax headsets. That goes for all of the different ones within their range. Now, one of the byproducts of that is that there's actually quite a lot of open source development going on as well. And one of the things that we have been exploring, and we'll explore more in another video, is a new thing called Open Composite and Open XR, which is an unofficial runtime, and that should see some pretty decent performance gains. So that is definitely something that we'll check out with the 8KX and the 5K Super in the future. So lastly on the pros list, and I think this is probably the most important thing as it kind of summarizes the overall experience here. So what I've written in my notes here is much better value in terms of performance to price, as you're able to extract more performance with less sacrifice. Even with my 12900K and 3080 Ti system that we tested this on, still wasn't able to run any of the sim titles that I tried at absolute max settings. But that said, and this is the important part, where I ended up with this headset put me very close to the same kind of visual and performance quality as I had with the 8KX for about half the price. So again, with a 3080 Ti and 12900K, so a very high-end system, with the 8KX, I was having to introduce scaling or turn graphics down, having to make sacrifices that basically brought the visual quality down to about the same level as we had with the 5K Super anyway. So again, that kind of makes you question, is it really worth paying the extra money for the 8KX? Now, obviously, if you have a system that can run it at maximum, then absolutely yes, it's an awesome experience. But for the majority of us, I don't think we're going to be able to get the maximum performance out of the 8KX as it stands right now, and you're most likely going to end up having a similar experience to what you have with the 5K Super, so why spend the extra money? Now obviously that will be different if you're playing games that aren't quite so taxing on your system. Sim racing titles and flight sims are particularly heavy on your system, so again, that will be a consideration there. But yeah, overall I feel like this headset hits a really, really good sweet spot when it comes to the balance of performance. So let's move on now into the cons list, and there are quite a few things on here. First of all, the user experience does feel quite bootleg compared with other headsets that we've tried. Although customer support were quick to respond to tickets, and we did go through their normal ticket system, so they didn't know that we were reviewers. They weren't giving us any sort of preferential treatment, at least to the best of my knowledge. It still took us over 2 days to get the headset working smoothly just in Assetto Corsa Competizione and iRacing. So little things like screen flickering, jerky tracking, image ghosting, crashing, all those things just made the experience quite frustrating to get up and running. And I think the most frustrating thing was that you'd be sort of trying to troubleshoot one issue and then you'd reboot the PC and then a different issue would happen, but the first thing was fixed, and it was just kind of all over the place, which made logical fault finding quite a difficult process. So once it was all up and running, it was great, but it just isn't a product, at least in our experience, that you can just plug in and go every time. If you've only got maybe half an hour to race after work and after you got your kids to bed before you go to bed yourself, you just want to be able to plug it in, you just want to be able to go, and you don't want any hassle. And at least in our experience, that wasn't really the case with this particular headset. There was always something that wasn't quite working that would require a reboot, or rebooting the game or whatever it might be. And yeah, I'm sure that those things can be ironed out over time, but it is what it is, at least for us, and we have to obviously let you guys know about that. So I did become quite frustrated with the headset during this review process. I'm not gonna lie to you guys. Now, next con was, although comfortable initially, the unit is quite front heavy, and I did find that it caused excessive pressure, particularly on the bridge of my nose, and I probably actually still have a mark there, which meant that I couldn't wear it for more than about 40 minutes at a time. Now, this is obviously worse if you're running a motion rig as well. If you're bouncing around all over the place, there's enough weight in there that it will sort of ride on the bridge of your nose and create some rubbing and some issues over time. So something to consider there. Obviously the weight and the size of the thing is necessary because of the size of the field of view, but it is definitely a trade-off that you need to be aware of. Now, there are some aftermarket counterweight kits which do improve this. We tested out the Studioform Creative VR system, which is linked down in the description, so I would definitely recommend checking that out. So that did do a pretty good job of shifting some of the weight backwards to take some of the weight off the bridge of my nose, but obviously it does add more overall weight to the unit. So if you don't have particularly strong neck muscles, if you're moving around driving and simming, you are going to feel the effects of that weight over time. Now, another thing that I noticed, and this will of course be anatomy dependent, is that the face shield wasn't a particularly good fit for me. I do have quite a skinny head, but what I found as a result of that was that there was quite a lot of light bleed coming in from behind the unit. Obviously, we're sitting in the studio here with studio lights, and I do have a bright light sitting right behind me. And when I had the headset on, that light was coming right in and reflecting off the headset all around, bouncing around behind the lens and creating all sorts of weird things going on. So if you're playing in a dimly lit room, then it's probably not going to be an issue for you. It would be relatively easy to fix by just adding an extra foam insert and making it a more snug fit on your face. So honestly, not something that I think is a big deal, but it is definitely worth mentioning. The rubber nose pads are quite sharp, and you will need to be very careful that you don't poke yourself in your eye. Now, this is something that I called out when we did our 8KX review, and obviously they are exactly the same on this headset too, being the exact same external design. So I actually gave myself quite a nasty scratch on my cornea with the 8KX headset when we were testing that, and it took quite a number of days for it to stop sort of being inflamed and sore. So you do need to be very careful with how you put this headset on. You don't want to kind of scrape it across your eyes with your eyes open. What I do is I kind of put the faceplate directly on my face and then snap the back in place rather than sort of trying to pull it down over my head. So definitely be aware and careful of that. But I would like to see that design changed with a rounder finish or a rounder bevel on the edge, just to reduce the risk of any damage to your eyes, because eye injuries are not very fun, and I've had a really bad one in the past, so I know firsthand just how nasty things can get. So default sound quality isn't great. We touched on this before. Would definitely recommend using your own earbuds. Now, it's great that they don't force you to spend extra money on expensive inbuilt headphones. Those are available as an upgrade kit, but as I mentioned earlier on in the Pro section, I would just recommend using your own headphones, honestly. It's a better overall experience. While these do sound okay, they do have quite a bit of sound spill, and they are going to annoy anybody else that might be trying to study or sleep nearby. So yeah, just use your own headphones. While the software is relatively easy to use when things are working, the firmware update process in particular will be scary for anybody who isn't confident with computers. It does involve command lines and things like that, so it's not as simple as just clicking a button and having the software update done. And obviously, if you push a wrong thing or insert a wrong command, you could potentially brick the device. So again, not a massive deal there, but it is something that we had to do both on the 8KX and the 5K Super to get working properly. So chances are you may end up having to do it too. And if you're not confident doing that kind of thing, it may be a little bit scary for you. So last on my cons list, and this was probably the most disappointing thing with this headset in terms of the actual user experience when everything was working properly. So running refresh rates of 160 Hertz or 180 Hertz restricts the field of view. Now 160 Hertz brings it in a little bit, probably maybe by 20 or so degrees, but 180 Hertz really shrinks it down to the point where, in my opinion at least, it pretty much defeats the purpose of having such a big bulky headset. Obviously the trade-off for such a big bulky headset is that you are getting that really nice big wide field of view. So if you're restricting that all the way down, then you're really not taking advantage of all that extra screen space. Now, honestly, for most people, I don't think they're going to notice the difference between 144 Hertz and 180 Hertz. For me, I can't really tell the difference above 90 Hertz, if I'm completely honest with you. Some people are going to disagree with me there. What I did find is that when I ran higher refresh rates and tried to push my frames per second higher, if I wasn't able to keep a stable frame rate at that level, then I would start to see some jerking and some weird things going on inside the game. So I wouldn't recommend, running 144 Hertz, say for example, and then running your frame rate uncapped and having it sort of varying from 90 to 144. I think the experience is going to be better just leaving it on 90 and keeping that frame rate capped there. But again, that's going to depend on the game you're playing and your personal preference. Different people seem to respond differently to different refresh rates, and I don't really want to get into that argument in today's video, but I'm sure we can discuss it down in the comments. So in conclusion, guys, I think at around about half the price of the 8KX or Varjo Aero, this does represent a really good sweet spot when it comes to flight simming and driving sim in particular. That wider field of view that you get with these headsets really is a game changer. It gives you a much greater sense of speed, means that you don't have to turn your head as much to see what's going on around you either, which does make a genuine difference to the driving and flying experience. Obviously, it is still quite expensive. It is double the price of something like an HP Reverb G2 with the prices that are going around at the moment. Overall, the visual quality is quite similar to the G2, although without such a large field of view on the G2. So if you're playing games that don't require a larger field of view, then I probably wouldn't buy this. I'd probably go with something a little bit cheaper that still has that good visual quality. At least for me, the experience of using something like a Reverb has been a lot smoother with a lot less glitches as well. So that is something to consider too. But if you are after something that has that wider field of view, then I do think that this is a really strong option. I would struggle to recommend the 8KX over this simply because even with a really high-end system, it's hard to push that, if not impossible to push that to its absolute maximum potential whilst maintaining a stable frame rate, at least with today's technology. We'll see what happens once the 4000 series comes out from NVIDIA very soon. So while the 8KX undoubtedly does have more potential, as it stands right now with the technology that's available to consumers today, I feel like the 5K Super is able to give us a very similar overall experience at half the price, and you really can't ask for too much more than that. So I really hope that this review has helped you guys out. If it has, please do leave a thumbs up. Consider subscribing to the channel as well. And if you do decide you want to pick up one of these headsets or any of the other gear that we've discussed in today's video, please do check out those affiliate links down in the description below. That is an awesome way of helping to support our work here at Boosted Media at no additional cost to you, and we really do appreciate it. So thank you very much for watching, guys, and I will see you again very soon. Bye.